It's 6:31.
Pretty excited, can't they?
Better find the script.
Municipal people.
Can we urgently?
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm calling this special meeting of June the 12th, 2019 to order. Director, would you please take the roll call?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, trustees. This is our roll call for our special meeting of June 12, 2019. Trustee Barry.
Present.
Trustee Cram.
Present.
Trustee Danaher.
Present.
Trustee Jacobs.
Present.
Vice Chair McPherson.
Present.
Chair McAllister.
Present.
Trustee McCray.
Present.
Trustee McDonald.
Present.
Trustee Parisian.
Present.
Trustee Schooler. Trustee Swan.
Present.
Student Trustee Bushra-Cadra.
Present.
Mr. Chair, you have quorum.
Thank you, Director. Trustee Schooler has advised me that he will be calling in after at 8 o'clock or after. Item 401. I need a mover and a seconder, please, for the agenda. Moved by Mr. Trustee Barry, Trustee Danaher, that the Upper Canada District School Board approve the special board meeting agenda of May 29, 2019. Would you cast your ballots, please?
Mine's in private sector. Sorry.
I'm okay, Chair, but I'm in a different program right
That vote passes. Next is 501. Are there any conflict of interest declarations? Seeing none, ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to move into private session number 1. I need a mover and a seconder, please. Trustee McDonald, Trustee Barry, that the Upper Canada District School Board move into Committee of the Whole June 12, 2019 at 6:33 p.m. Got your ballots, please. That motion passes. We have a second motion that moved by Trustee Parisian and Trustee Barry, that the Committee of the Whole move into private session, number 1 on June 12th, 2019. Please cast your online vote. That motion carries. At this point, I turn the chair over to you.
We also have to clear the room.
We have to clear the room. I'm sorry.
For the policy?
All right. That's what Don presented. Oh. Ruby Green recommended, but, yeah.
There's another one.
Yeah.
What I sent to you, Lisa?
What's that?
I don't know if that's what I just sent to you.
You just sent it to me.
Diana had a good point, to the extent that some of the setbacks are guidance,
That's what it changed, because
back at artificially
it's
gives,
on June the 12th.
No, so,
and you put back on the other side.
what's presented today?
Well,
Yeah, I'm sorry, yeah, not that, yeah, right.
you're thinking you pay for it, he's thinking you pay for it, but it's presenting it orally?
As presented.
It's just an accounting thing. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
We'll figure that out later.
Yeah, it would be level 2.
This one here.
I guess I need this. Is it on? That's right, it's on.
Okay. Is everyone ready? We're dealing with 7.01 on the agenda of the regular board meeting. And I need a mover and a seconder to move back into the special board meeting, June 12th, 2019, at 7:19 PM. Mover, please. Trustee Danaher and Trustee McCray. Please cast your vote online. That motion carries. Item 801, report of the Education Advisory Committee. I'll turn this portion of the meeting over to the Chair of SEAC, Trustee McPherson.
Thank you. SEAC, like the board, has been double downing on our meetings. In front of you, you see the report from May 21st and June 4th. It's a well-written report. I'm sure you've all read it. And I do have one recommendation coming forth from the June 4th meeting of the Special Education Advisory Committee. And I shall read it to you. Moved by Deborah Wood, that we believe special education is a ramp so that our most vulnerable students can access the Ontario curriculum. We continue to believe that all means all. With that in mind, we move to support our trustees in their difficult deliberations. In our advisory role, our recommendation is to make choices that minimize the impact for special education services. Seconded by Michelle Labonte, and it was carried unanimously. So that motion has come forth to the board as a recommendation. And if you see anything you have any questions on, simply direct them to either myself or Superintendent Ferguson.
Is it anything here?
And we will meet again next week.
Are there any questions of Trustee McPherson and the SEAC report?
Oh, okay.
There being none, thank you, Trustee McPherson, and thank the committee for their support.
Yep.
We are now moving to item 802, proposed budget for 2019-2020. And if I could, trustees, I would like to place our deliberations in context. And as you know, I do like to write sometimes, so I'm going to read a bit of what I've written.
As long as you don't sing.
I won't sing or play the guitar. My goal this evening, my personal goal as your chair, is to have this board finalize the 2019-2020 budget in preparation for formal approval by the board next week at our regular board meeting on June the 19th. I want to express my gratitude to you, trustees, to our senior staff, and to our Director of Education for the heavy lifting and the open discussion we held last Wednesday on this topic. However, our work is not quite yet complete. It's important that we place our fiscal situation in context. For all of us, this is an exercise in responsible local government that the public expects, and it's not a blame game. The province has a $11.7 billion deficit, and our deficit is $11.7 million for 2019-2020. And those figures are similar quite accidentally or coincidentally. All public sector organizations are being asked to realize efficiencies and to balance their budgets, and our board is no different. We are doing our part as responsible and respected stewards of the resources provided to us by the taxpayers of Ontario. This is the new reality that we all face in our leadership work. So why are we in this predicament? 3 reasons. Firstly, there have been grant reductions implemented by the Ministry of Education in certain areas, such as the secondary school programming grant, the grade 4 to 8 teacher allocation, and the grant for secondary school teachers based on the new class size initiative of 28 to 1 versus 22 to 1 in the past. We acknowledge that the government has provided additional funding to limit the impact of the grant reductions in some cases. For example, the new staffing attrition protection funding in order to ensure that no secondary classroom teacher is laid off due to the class size change. In other cases, we respect the realities that come with shifting funding models that respond to new and pressing priorities. This results in some grants for the next fiscal year being modified or may have even expired. Secondly, we acknowledge that in an effort to operate schools and provide students with the best service possible, overspending has occurred for the benefit of our students in some areas, such as special education. We have concluded a special education review and are initiating a power pilot program, which, if successful, will assist the board in reducing costs and possibly increasing provincial funding through a model that fully meets eligibility requirements under special education grant structure. Thirdly, the student transportation issue will not have a direct impact on this board's 2019-2020 budget because the government has recognized that our increased transportation costs for 2019-2020 are beyond the control of our board and are therefore providing funding to cover any deficits emanating from the 2018-19 budget year. We acknowledge this funding assistance and are sincerely grateful to the Government of Ontario. It should be noted, however, that our fiscal flexibility has been seriously impaired as a result of student transportation deficits created in 2017-18 and 2018-19 as a result of the imposed arbitration award. These legacy costs are directly due to the impact of an imposed arbitration settlement which was unforeseen and totally beyond our control. We are working in a positive and very constructive way with the current government and remain hopeful in seeking fiscal relief from this legacy debt. Finally, I remind trustees that all our work to date in developing the 2019-2020 budget has been guided by the following principles. The board committed to a balanced budget in accordance with Ministry of Education regulations. Efficiencies were to be realized with the goal of minimizing the impact on the classroom. We sought to align our spending as much as possible with the actual revenues from the province. Efficiencies would be sought in all areas of the board's operation. And finally, we directed the senior staff to seek and implement innovative practices where possible. So, trustees, with those comments, let us begin the task before us. Director, I turn this over to you at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. As you know, trustees, we've been working over the last 6 weeks to continue to support your budget deliberations, starting off very general with information from the province, And then, as we got more detailed information from the Ministry of Education, to bring that to you is to start to shape and inform the dialogue that you wish to have over the last few weeks. This evening, Mr. Chair, what we have is further information on the direction of the board from last Wednesday's meeting. And so tonight, staff brings that to your attention for further discussion and deliberation as you try to work closer towards the goal of establishing a budget on or before the 30th of June. So, Mr. Chair, I'll turn that over to Mr. Richard, our Senior Business Advisor, and then we'll, after the presentation from staff, be looking forward to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As noted in the board report, Mr. Chair, I think it's worth revisiting, as I've indicated at several meetings, that senior staff have been guided by the principles laid out in the report as we prepared the materials and assembled the information for the board's review and use. And I think the chair pointed out very aptly, I guess, the number one guideline, and in fact the board made a motion and approved it, that you'd have a balanced budget for 2019-20 as per Ministry of Education guidelines. Also, the trustees made it clear they wanted a series of considerations that they could look at, and hopefully staff have been able to meet that requirement. Also, that we were to look at reductions and in some cases even additions if that was of some assistance to supporting student programming. And then the last one was the gradual reduction of special education expenditures to improve alignment with the corresponding funding that comes from the Ministry of Education. As Mr. Chair noted, the budget gap for 1920 is $11.7 million and thus requires a reduction in planned spending to meet that in order to have the balanced budgets that the board has determined it will have based on that approval of the motion in an earlier meeting. Staff also over several meetings, the last 3 or 4 meetings, Mr. Chair, brought back information on the new GSNs as well as a series of considerations. Trustees provided input as to the bringing back of even more considerations. And I think at the last meeting we brought you back a possible scenario for your consideration that was based upon the input from the trustees that indicated they wanted the level 1 considerations to be included in the budget scenario, as well as a hybrid of level 2 and level 3 considerations. Senior staff did do that at the last meeting, and you asked us to bring back a budget that would include the recommended budget scenario that you see up on the screen. Highlighted in green is that scenario, which is a combination of all the level 1 savings that were indicated under level 1 considerations, as well as some of the level 2 and a few of the level 3. Mr. Chair, I don't know if you want to stop right there, or would you like me to complete the presentation and then you would come back to this, or I can continue and finish, or you can start
Now,
whatever you'd like.
presentation, the PowerPoint, or this? Go to this first, please.
I'm not sure, Andrew, are we doing the presentation, or do you wish to discuss the scenario and finalize it before I go in? I believe I heard you wanted to finalize it before? Yes. So, Mr. Chair, what you see in green is what is brought last week. The PowerPoint presentation is based on those considerations, which add up to a total reduction of $11.7 million. Trustees are obviously, if you want to consider a change of any of those, you can do so. Your motion said only that the total would be $11.7 million, and as long as those considerations add up to that amount, then you're honoring your motion that you approved.
Thank you, Mr. Richard. Chair, trustees, I open this up to the floor. Trustee Cram?
You have a motion, Chair?
Yes, we do. I think. I have a motion moved by trustee Cram, seconded by trustee Parizien, that the Upper Canada District School Board approve the green recommended budget scenario amounting to reductions on $11,698,021 as presented on June the 12th, 2019, as the basis for our 2019-2020 budget calculations. Trustee McCray?
I'm wanting to know why we have been given this capital budget. Why are we not putting it on the table? And I understand that it's been given to us, that we have no say over. But to me, when we're cutting all these people, we should put it out there and discuss it.
Thank you. Director, would you like to comment on that?
Mr. Chair, through you, I'm going to ask Mr. Richard to comment first, and from there possibly Superintendent Hobbs.
Mr. Chair, basically, the capital, the reason it's shown partly because it's separate is because it is indeed separate. The funding that is provided by the ministry is enveloped for that purpose. The board does not have the choice to take some of that money, move it into operations and hire more staff or whatnot. It is only for the purpose for which it was assigned by the government.
What would they do if we gave it back?
Superintendent Hobbs, would you like to comment further?
I don't think I have much more to add beyond what Mr. Richard had to say, actually. With regard to some of the regular capital we get for dealing with annual maintenance projects, it's very clear that that is sweatered and to be only spent on qualifying capital projects. And with regard to some of the special project capital allocations we've received for new school construction and additions and early childhood retrofits, for example, those are specifically only to be spent on those projects and only will be released by the ministry upon approval of a qualifying project. So those are even more tightly regulated than our annual regular renewal capital.
I would like, further? I'd like to see the unions be offered the opportunity to take a pay cut to keep some of these jobs going.
Trustee McCray,
Yes.
you are going against the Education Act, the Labor Act, Collective Bargaining Act, and any other act that I know affecting this kind of discussion, and I am ruling out of order. So, we are moving on with
Mr. McDonald next.
Trustee McDonald.
Mr. Chair, just to go back to the motion that's on the floor with regard to the green, I'd like to move an amendment that the amount of $830,657 be removed from line 3, secondary programming, student success teachers, and the subsequent $830,000 be found in special education level 2, so that we would maintain the 11,698,021 amount.
You have the motion in front of you. I'm going to read it. I need a seconder, please. Trustee Danaher. I'm going to read the motion again, and then I'm going to open the floor for discussion with Trustee McDonald speaking to it first. The amendment to the primary motion is that the Upper Canada District School Board remove the $830,657 from Level 1 savings column, secondary programming, student success teachers, and apply these reductions within the reductions found with the special education Level 2 section. Trustee McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've heard from a number of principals during their presentations here when they're presenting their SIPSAs, and just in speaking to the principals when they're in the schools, the value and the benefit of student success teachers to the students in the schools, and the supports that they're able to provide those students that might otherwise be on the fringe. We've heard from Vankleek Hill one story of a student who was able to move past that point and actually get a graduate as a result of some of the work that was done by the student success teacher. There's more of those success stories out there. That's just one example, and I think there's value in having those individuals within our schools and making sure that we continue to support those students. What I'm proposing when we remove from the level 2 impact, the level 2 impact would not have an impact on students of special needs. The impact would predominantly be just a reassignment of our resources within our school settings, as opposed to having it funded for a particular role within special education, but to support wellness or those types of things. But now being in a school and supporting students and wellness in other ways, in other roles. So the bottom line, the number stays the same, but I think this supports schools in a much more efficient way.
Would any other trustee wish to speak for or against? Trustee McPherson.
Thank you. I'm a little bit concerned here. And correct me if my interpretation's wrong. When we look at the reductions, and we just read a lowly motion from SEAC about supporting the trustees. When I look at the 816,000 and change, what is not factored in there is the cost of the PowerPoint program. To put the PowerPoint program in place, we're looking at roughly $640,000, roughly speaking. Correct me if I'm wrong. Certainly. Yeah, if I'm chasing the wrong dog here, tell me.
Trustee McPherson, or Superintendent McPherson?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The cost of that pilot is included, and so you would still see those savings.
Yeah. Okay, but what's concerning me here is we've just doubled the reduction in spec ed to however way you want to cut it, to roughly $1.6 million. As previously stated, spec ed services serves as a ramp to get a lot of kids across that line. And I need some assurances that we're not going to be giving up spec ed services at a greater rate than I understood. I'm not in charge.
Director?
Mr. Chair, through you, it's important that staff take that request seriously at a number of different levels. Number one, the board's well aware that we've been advantaged by an overspend in special education over the last few years. And what we've been able to do through that overspend is to be able to adjust where the needs were at that time. It's understood by staff that the budget that's being proposed, that there's still an overspend that's occurring in special education, and what would require staff to do is to revisit how those resources that we were overspending on last year could be reoriented or repurposed to address existing and new needs. So with that, Mr. Chair, we understand that that would be the expectation of the board, and we understand that the board is still taking some significant steps to augment special education beyond the current grant line, and we understand the responsibility that comes with what it means to resource programs accordingly.
Thank you.
Further questions or comments? On the line, anyone?
Through you, Chair.
Yes, Trustee Swan?
Could we, and this is just a proposal, half the number of student success teachers that are on the chopping block, or whatever a better word is, but it's a terrible situation, and still keep half that money in the special education budget?
So what you are proposing is an amendment to the amendment.
Yes.
Would you care to rephrase that and formalize that?
So, Mr. Chair,
Well, first I would like to ask, can I ask a question first?
Yes, you may.
I would like to ask, is it doable if we cut that number down to 415,000 and change? Would they still be effective, the student success teachers?
Trustee Cram, would you like to comment?
Thank you, Chair. As the original mover of the motion, the only difficulty I would have with what Trustee Swan is saying at this point is we would have to then, tonight, in my opinion, find another $400 and some thousand off of this budget to replace the 400 and some thousand that she wants to add back in. And I have sympathy for the motion because I really don't like having to cut 11.7 million out of our budget. But I would be opposed to that, any amendment that goes that way, just to be honest with you.
Trustee Danaher?
Just a comment, I think the role of student success teacher touches all students, specifically geared toward at-risk students. Often, student success teachers work with spec ed students and special needs students to help them get to the line. It's a role that touches all students in a secondary school, including spec ed students. And I think by diluting it down, you are making it ineffective. And it has to be, I think it's the 830,000, and I believe it to be something that serves all students, including spec ed students in high school.
Trustee McPherson?
Just a comment. Is this motion not a bit premature? Shouldn't this motion have come in half an hour, 45 minutes from now, when we've had a public discussion on what's in front of us, instead of saying, okay, we'll go with the green, with the slight modification? So will that end the discussion of what's on the screen in front of us? For instance, I've still got questions about the option of twinning the schools. So can we put a hold on? I don't know the procedure.
Director?
There are two motions on the table.
So, Mr. Chair, through you, no one has called the question yet on the motion nor the amendment. So the dialogue right now continues with the amendment, and the question or the topic at this moment is finding out, Mr. Chair, whether or not Trustee Swan is making a recommendation for a sub-amendment. And if Trustee Swan is seeking to do that, to see if there's a seconder, and if there's no seconder, then the amendment dies and it goes back to the first amendment.
But can we speak to the general presentation rather than speaking to the motion before the assembly?
I think, Mr. Chair, there's a motion and an amendment, and it doesn't preclude the conversations from still continuing on the table.
Okay, thank you.
May I ask another question?
Just a moment, Trustee Swan. Trustee McDonald?
Just a point of clarification. So discussion should be around the amendment only right now?
Right.
And then once that's disposed of, the discussion would be around the original motion only?
Right.
Okay. If there's discussion outside of those motions, then it would have to take place afterwards.
Correct.
So Trustee Swan, you have the option of moving an amendment, or do you still wish to proceed on the basis of what you heard from your colleagues?
No, I don't want to proceed on that, but I also might want to propose another amendment. And if we pass the green, this is where I'm confused as well. If we pass this amount, does that mean we cannot change it with another amendment?
Trustee Swan, let's deal with the amendment first. And then
But I don't
we'll
know
go-
what I'm voting on. That's my question.
Yes, we are voting on the amendment. And the amendment reads that the Upper Canada District School Board, is this?
It's on your screens too.
That the Upper Canada District School Board remove the $830,657 from Level 1 Savings Column, Secondary Programming, Student Success Teachers, and apply these reductions within the reductions found within the Special Education Level 2 section. So, Trustee McDonald, if you speak, you will be closing debate. Are there any other speakers who wish to speak to the amendment?
Trustee Codra.
Trustee Codra?
I would just like to, through you, Chair, I would just like to really quickly touch, as well as Trustee McDonald and Trustee Danaher have done council already on the importance of student success teachers. They don't just help students that are at risk or that are not going to graduate. They help all students. I don't know of a single student who hasn't been talked to by a student success teacher, even if they are well on their way to graduation. They are there just to make sure that students are okay, they are going to graduate, regardless of their average or their volunteer hours. Like, they're there just to check in and make sure that they get to that final line. So like, they are incredibly important to all students, similar to what Trustee Danaher had said earlier.
Thank you very much, Student Trustee Bush. Any other comments or questions from trustees? Then I'll ask Trustee McDonald to close.
My comments are fine. I'm just ready for the call for the vote.
That is, if that is the case, then I ask you to cast your ballot online.
Take this side off, though.
You may.
Stay over here, you see how I vote, to make sure that I get it right.
Let me fix that. I'm just going to hire my mouse.
Trustee Schooler, would you be online at this point? Trustee Swan, you have voted, and Trustee Jacobs, you have voted. That motion carries. So now we return to the original motion, and I'm going to read it again.
With the amendment, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
And that's where the discussion now is at.
Right. Could you put the original, please? That the Upper Canada District School Board approve the green recommended budget scenario amounting to reductions on $11,698,021 as presented on June the 12th, 2019 as the basis for our 2019-2020 budget calculations as amended. We have the floor is open for dialogue. Trustee McPherson.
Thank you. Your twinning of schools, option number 2. I believe that's one we're looking at. A lot of this is happening in my backyard. And the other thing is that we are currently in the process of revamping student transportation. A lot of it in my backyard. I like to look out in my backyard and see cows. I can see something else happening here, and my question is, will we have the resources on the ground with twinning some of our rural schools to deal with the potential backlash, problem-solving, fallout of revamping the buses on the 1st of September? It could be one of those times where a full-time principal is almost mandatory. So I just want to have the assurance that if we reduce this by roughly $250,000, that we will have the people on the ground to deal with any issues that could arise.
Director?
Mr. Chair, through you, it's understood that the board has high expectations for the schools to be functional in every possible way that attends to the safety of students and efficient service. I'm going to ask Mr. Coombs if he could comment in a moment, though, because you've asked a question about how will it really work, regardless whether it's student transportation or any other matter, with what's been brought forward as some possible adjustments to the budget as relates to school admin. So I'll turn it over to Superintendent Coombs.
Thank you, Director. Through you, Mr. Chair. I believe the question is, would a partial administrator at a school have the capacity to deal with the issues that are raised in September or any other time of year? Am I correct in what the question is? So I would say that in these schools where we would propose a twinning and a partial administrator, that there would be students of 60, 70 in that range as far as enrollment goes. And while certainly with 60 kids in a school, you could still have significant issues, certainly the day-to-day capacity of or workload would be significantly less than if you were in a school of, say, 320 or 300, 400 students. And I also would like to say that our administrators have access to a number of different resources, both at the board with superintendency support, as well as within their school with the office administrator support. I would think that regardless, in the past when we have had schools with partial administrators, and certainly within our history with the past few years, we have had partial time administrators within our schools, that they have been able to function accordingly, again, considering that the schools that we are proposing for this have significantly lower enrollment than we would look at in other schools. So, of course, if anything did happen which required additional support, the board stands ready to lend whatever support is necessary.
Trustee McPherson, does that reassure you?
Certainly.
Thank you. Trustee McCray?
Is that to understand that there won't be, if there is a problem, that an office administrator will be dealing with it, or will there be a senior personnel sort of?
Trustee Coombs? Or Superintendent Coombs? I'll get these straight yet.
Okay, Mr. Chair, that's fine. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Office Administrator is present to take public concerns and certainly to answer some operational questions. Oftentimes, as you may know, that certainly when parents call in, the first person they talk to is an Office Administrator. The Office Administrator will then take their concern and, if they can, provide the information at the time or pass it along to the principal for further response.
Will it be in the building?
We'll be in the building, yeah.
McDonald.
Trustee McDonald, and then Trustee Perry. Trustee McDonald?
Thank you. I just want to talk about this section green, and I think this is probably one of the most difficult budgets that I've ever had to face as a trustee in 18 plus years. Never before have we seen these levels. And I listen to your words, Chair, and I certainly don't want to point blame anywhere, but if we look at what we had to find as far as reductions this year, 11.7 million. Some rough calculations with a reduction of student enrollment, it's about $2 million. Reduction in what we're going to see as a result of some of the funding changes, it adds up to 11.7 million. Sure, we're overspent on spec ed, but we're getting less funding because of some of the changes that are taking place with the government. We're getting less funding because we have a reduction of students. So that's an impact to what we have to do. And yes, we need to make some changes, and we need to make sure that we are more efficient with the things that we do, and we need to make sure that we are good stewards of the funds that we do receive and provide the education to our students. When I look at the discussion that we've had over the last month and a bit, I guess, several meetings anyway, I think we've come a long way. I'd never be one to say that we should cut $11 million without any discussion and without any rigor associated to it, and I think we've had that. And I thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank our staff to be able to get us to this point. I think our work isn't done though. We are at 11.7 million, but we still have some work to do moving forward. And make sure that we are continuing to do our due diligence and being good stewards of the funds. You said it earlier, I think the funds that we have with us and the reductions that we're making are very limited to the classroom and very limited to the students. And I think that's a testament to the work that we've done and the discussions that we've had to make sure that we are passing a budget that students will remain our priority, and students, we live to our mission that we're providing a successful journey, successful life for all of our students. So I think it's an opportunity for us to celebrate the fact that we've come a long way, but still recognize that it was a bitter pill to swallow to be able to get to this point.
Thank you for your comments, Trustee McDonald. Are there any further questions or comments on this motion?
I'd like to propose an amendment.
Yes, Trustee Swan.
I would like to propose an amendment that further reduction in program department, I'm debating if it's 2 or 3 because they're both so important. Part 2, actually, Part 3. We'll go with Part 3. I'm just looking back on another sheet, sorry.
Take your time.
Okay, further. Okay, as much as I'd like Part 2, I'm proposing that we take the further reduction of the program department in Part 3 out. We're already up the $600,000 from removing the student success teachers and the amendment to special education level 2. So I would just like to take that out, as I think it's a very incremental part of student success and learning.
Point of clarification, Mr. Chair. The amendment that passed was only a change of $830,000, so I'm not quite certain where her numbers are coming from, but...
Do you want half of the 830?
Well, 830,000. I'm talking about 703,000. 917. Further reduction, Part 2.
703,917.
Yes, I'd like that
That's the incremental
removed.
reduction of Learning Commons informationists. Yep.
Yeah, this.
That's it.
Just taking the middle one, you can't do it. Take the last one. Okay.
You can't say that.
It's just, if you look at your screen, look at your screen. Pull that back up on your screen.
Oh, I didn't know we could talk specific jobs, or else I can go further on this.
Well, we can't.
So that's my motion, is to remove the 703,000 further reduction in
You're
program.
looking at further reduction in Program Department Part 2.
Yes.
Thank you. So I'm going to read the motion again. Do you have a seconder, Trustee Swan?
Well, I didn't know I was doing this till now, so not yet. I'd like to ask for one, please.
Trustee Swan is asking for a seconder.
Yeah, I'll say that.
Trustee McCray has seconded.
Thank you.
Therefore, the motion reads, the amendment to the main motion reads that the Upper Canada District School Board remove the Level 3 savings, further reduction in Program Department Part 2, $703,917. Any further discussion?
Just a point of clarification, Mr. Chair. It goes against a previous motion that we have to pass a balanced budget of $11.7 million, or $11.698,021. By removing that $700,000, we would have to find it elsewhere.
Trustee Swan, are you prepared to find $703,917 someplace else?
I thought we already came up with extra money when we passed the first one.
No, it was a wash.
Thanks. I guess I'm washed out on this one because there's nowhere else to take money from.
Do you want
I
me
guess, okay.
Do you want me to still proceed with this motion?
Yes, I guess, because then we can go back.
Well, I guess the issue would be
Is if I'm out of
if we pass
procedure.
this motion, it's contingent upon finding similar amounts elsewhere.
Well, it goes against your previous motion that we passed as a board. So if it's not contained in it, then we would be against our own proceedings.
Do you understand, Trustee Swan?
Well, I understand what he's saying, but that's what I asked for clarification on before I voted on the last one. But anyway, okay, so I have to find somewhere to take it out of. So
We also have Mr. Mr. McPherson, you have Mr. Barry.
Okay.
Speak.
I just want to clarify. Okay, Trustee McPherson?
The first motion that we dealt with took it from one line and made a destination. In other words, in, out. It was accommodated for. Nothing changed on the bottom line. This amendment changes that bottom line by $703,000. So for it to be effective, it has to be taken out here, put back in somewhere else. Is that my understanding is correct?
Your understanding is correct.
Thank you.
Trustee Barry?
I have the same point. Mr. McPherson has covered my point. Thank you.
Trustee Swan, the ball is in your court.
Well, then I'll move down to part 3. But I can't, because even if I want a twin schools part 1 option, that's not enough to even keep the program department part 3 in. Is that out? Is that correct?
I believe that is so.
Because I'm still out $20,000. Does anyone have any creative solutions around the table for me to keep this position in?
I see. Trustee Cram?
Thanks, Chair. No, I don't have any creative solutions, but it goes to, I mean, I think in the last week, we've all been going scenarios all through our head about what can go in and what can go out. And I reached a conclusion about Monday that the green area was the best scenario we could come up with. And Trustee McDonald, thank you for coming up for an amendment that helps out tremendously in what I believe is the school. So thank you for that. But I just don't see any other creative way that we can do it. I'm sorry, Swan, this Trustee Swan, I'd like to support it, but I just can't see it.
Trustee
Thank you.
Swan, unless I hear...
I'll withdraw my amendment because I can't find an area in the budget that I believe we can change that's high enough.
Okay, thank you. The amendment I will consider withdrawn. We are now looking at the original amendment. Any further discussion? We've had an amendment to the amendment, and now we're back to the original motion. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I'm going to call upon Trustee McDonald as the mover of the motion to speak last and close debate.
No, it's Trustee Cram, actually.
Trustee Cram? Trustee Cram. I'm sorry.
I think my comments have already been made, and I think it's go right to the motion as far as I'm concerned.
Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to read the final motion and ask you to cast your vote. That the Upper Canada District School Board approve the green recommended budget scenario amounting to reductions on $11,698.21. Let me try this again. $11,698.21 as presented on June the 12th, 2019 as the basis for our 2019-2020 budget calculations as amended. I'd ask you to cast your vote.
Just a point, though.
Yes?
Can we use the title of the document as opposed to just green? So it's the summary of budget considerations, so that we know what we mean by green.
Recommended budget scenario.
Just, not necessarily an amendment, but just to make sure that we identify the document we're talking about in green.
And it is identified in quotation marks as the recommended budget scenario, which is the green.
Okay, that's good.
Okay?
Yep.
Please cast your vote, ladies and gentlemen.
Up here, all fast. Up here. Powerhouse.
Trustee Schooler, are you on the line? Motion carries. Motion carries. And Director, where do we head now?
So two things, Mr. Chair. We have a presentation from Mr. Richard, and the staff from this presentation will be bringing the full details of the budget, the usual budget book that is brought to you each year as part of the process. And this is the starting point to give you a synopsis or an overview of how the budget will look based on your motion.
Mr. Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Based on the trustees' approval of the motion to go with the green highlighted items with the amendment, the important point is I believe the 11.7 million remained intact, and therefore there's no changes required to the rest of the presentation, Mr. Chair, so I'll just carry on. This is a slide that the trustees see every year. I find it a very interesting one. It's a very good slide in that it quite clearly depicts that over the year and a half period from June 2018 to December of this year coming up, you actually have 3 budgets that you're dealing with in that year and a half. If we look to last June, you'll see there that the trustees would have been dealing with financial forecast number 3 based on your 2017-2018, as you're going to be dealing with at your June meeting with financial forecast number 3 for this year's budget. At the same time, you were dealing with the 18-19 original budget last year at this time. Then we move forward into November, where we have the financial statements that the board approved based on 2017-18 information. And then you're also looking at financial forecast number 1 for the budget that you approved last year, and that carries on through with number 2. And then trustees aren't always aware, but there's a 7-month report that gets done in May through the finance department. Very important from the ministry's point of view, because their fiscal year is March 31st, as you know, and of course they want to combine with that all the information from the grant recipients across the province, whether it be health, education, universities, colleges, and whatnot. So there's a lot of work that goes on in finance to give them that 7-month report from September to March, so that they can include it in their financial statements. Then we end up here in June, as you can see now, where we're looking at finalizing the 19-20 budget, and you'll be seeing financial forecast number 3, as I said, at the next meeting. And then we flow through to the fall, where you have both the financial statements for the 18-19 year coming to a close, and you'll be looking at financial forecast the next month, your first one on the budget that you're approving next week. The assumptions and notes that go into the information you're receiving tonight, Mr. Chair, is that the confirmed amounts only of the Ministry of Education grants are included. Any of the PPFs or anything like that that aren't will not be included at this point. As you well know, negotiations are underway between the Ministry of Education and the various labor groups. The priorities and partnership funds, you recall in an initial presentation when the GSNs were released, there were 10 PPFs, only global amounts of course, but 10, and we're still awaiting the remainder of those that we're hopeful will be announced in the near future. The projected 2019-20 enrollment is as of April 9th, 2019, and I'll recap that in a moment. Proposed budget scenario considerations were from the June 5th, 2019 meeting. However, obviously I can update now that that has been amended, but the 11.7 million reduction stays intact. The EFIS forms are being finalized as we speak, each and every day. And for comparative analysis, we're using the original estimates from 18-19 versus the original estimates for 19-20, of course. And Mr. Chair, just a quick recap on that projected enrollment, and I think Trustee McDonald pointed it out in his recap, is that we are seeing a reduction in enrollment once again this year, obviously smaller than some of the larger decreases you saw in previous years, but it is stabilizing. On the elementary day school ADE, a small reduction forecasted of 14. The secondary day school ADE shows 154. You'll recall throughout my various presentations the number 194. That additional 40 decrease is included in the third line under other enrollment. That is made up of 40 additional decline enrollment on the secondary greater than 21. But then there was actually an increase on the continuing education of 22 and a further reduction in summer school of 14, which adds up to that minus 32. So when you add it all up together, it's a reduction of approximately 200 students for next year for grant purposes. Yes, Mr. Chair, question?
Trustee Barry?
Okay, a total reduction in enrollment of 200. So of the 11.7 million, how much is due to decreased enrollment? Through you, Chair.
Can we do an approximate?
200 times 11.
Yeah. Mr. Chair, we're still working on the specific analysis that that plays in. We can certainly report back next week. When we do the presentation, we'll have that information.
Okay, thank you.
Proceed, Mr. Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Revenue less expense comparison. Your original budget in 2018-19, the total revenue was 372 plus million. Reported to the board with total expenses of 370,420, which would give you an in-year surplus of $2.3 million. Original budget for 19-20, you'll see there 370 million, the expenses of 364, with a total in-year surplus of 5.7 million. And Mr. Chair, before anyone gets excited, you're probably thinking, I thought we were balanced. That is just preliminary before we go into the accounting under PSAB with the ministry, and that'll quickly disappear. And then you'll see the decrease of each of those lines with a total in-year increase of about 3.3 million for the initial budget surplus. Just to recap special education, and this of course will change based on your motion tonight, your approved motion, Mr. Chair, showing the total revenue expenses, original budget for 18-19 under special education, and this was the original budget under 19-20 was based on your June 5th motion. That will be changed for next week based on the motion you approved this evening. Capital expenses, you'll see there a listing of the approved capital expenses that have come through from the Ministry of Education. So for at least for planning purposes for budget, these are the amounts that have been allocated from the ministry for approved projects. And you'll see there the new Brockville JK-6 school, an addition at North Grenville District High School, a couple additions. The school condition improvement, I'm sure that Superintendent Hobbs has outlined to you that over the years. There's quite a bit of money in that account, and initially at least planned for 21 million expenditures. Whether that would all get done, it doesn't impact. The money just stays in that account and only can be used for the purposes, as Superintendent Hobbs said, for school condition projects. School renewal of approximately 6.5 million. There's some child care capital that would be involved in some of the new school and additions, and then on the minor tangible capital assets, unfunded board office capital, and capital funded by other facilities revenue for a total of about 46.5 million, Mr. Chair. Based on the...
Excuse me, just a moment.
Yes.
Trustee McCray?
Back to that slide of where is the cost of the new Brockville JK-6 school, I gather, is around 12 million, give or take. 11, 12?
Trustee Hobbs, would you care to comment?
Yeah, it's around $12 million. There's about three major components to it. So there's the original allocation that was for the Brockville K-6 school, which was about 500 pupil places. There was a subsequent award of capital, I think, in the neighborhood of around $2 million for an early years addition that would go on to that school. And then there was a subsequent amount that the ministry allocated for the purchase of land, which we are still in the process of finalizing.
Then if this 6.8 million, is there more to come from them, from the government? To the total of 12 million?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Continue, please, Mr. Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So basically, for ministry compliance purposes, Mr. Chair, you'd have in-year revenues of just over $362 million, in-year expenses of $362 million, obviously identical because you have a balanced budget. And so you have neither a surplus nor a deficit, but an exact balanced budget as per your original motion. And the compliance threshold, that is the standard line that we show you. It doesn't apply this year in this case. The rules have changed, and you are limited to the lower of the surplus that you had last year coming into 1920, or the 1%. And so therefore for Upper Canada District School Board, it's 0. Since the budget is balanced, the board is fully compliant, and administration and governance envelope, the board is also fully compliant. And finally, Mr. Chair, next week we'll provide more. The Finance Department is working hard to try and get all the information together for next week. As you pointed out, Mr. Chair, it'll be much more detailed in terms of the numbers, and we will provide more detail here in terms of breaking it down, but we were trying to get it to you for this meeting. And you'll see there available for compliance, unappropriated, meaning this is probably, Mr. Chair, the line that the trustees would be most interested. This is actually what is available that hasn't been appropriated, neither internally or externally, that you would normally think of as available for the board for flexibility working funds. And you'll see there the minus 4.4 million, and mainly you know the reason why. That would have been in a positive situation in prior years. However, because of the arbitration award and the impact on student transportation costs, that was a negative as of 2018-19. And so you then have the available for compliance internally appropriated, which is the 6.2 million. And Mr. Chair, you would have seen this in years past. This would be your WSIB reserve of approximately 2.2 million. You also have UCLC with some reserves sitting there, and they would be shown in the compliance internally appropriated. And so those numbers all add up to approximately 6.2 million. So from an accounting point of view, you have a total accumulated surplus / deficit of $1.8 million. And so even though that shows as a surplus, Mr. Chair, as you know, it actually has been appropriated to 6.2. What the ministry says, we understand you've appropriated it for a specific purpose. However, the way we like to describe it is if the whole world ended tomorrow and the board ceased to operate, you then would have that 6.2 million, obviously, because you wouldn't need it for the purpose that it was appropriated for. And so, therefore, you'd have the 1.8. Then we're just restating the 1.8, and then we have the externally appropriated and this is imposed by the government, and the major one being the appropriation for retirement gratuity liability down the road, as well as a smaller amount for liability for future benefits. And so that's where you end up with the 5.7 externally appropriated. So the total accumulated surplus, you'll see there, it shows as 10.4, but that would mainly be taken up with, you have under the appropriated amount externally, almost $11 million just for land that is recognized by the ministry. So it's not cash sitting there. So as I said, Mr. Chair, the number you're really interested in is back on page 1, which is the minus 4.4 million. That concludes. As I indicated, Mr. Chair, next week we'll have that much more detailed background showing all of the different reserves and that for your information. If there's any questions, Mr. Chair, I'd be glad to take them.
Trustees, do you have any questions that you would like to direct to Mr. Richard? There being none, I believe that concludes. Pardon?
Anybody on the phones?
Any on the phones? Any questions?
Mr. Chair, if my mic, please, one final comment. As I indicated at a previous meeting, and I think it's important that the trustees hear this, based on your motion tonight, and we understand that it's still going next week for final approval, but as I've indicated over a few presentations, we are bumping up against collective agreements. You should know Human Resources will actually start tomorrow with some of the processes they have to put in place to meet the requirements under the collective agreement. There's staffing processes that are very important, and as you realize, it's no fault of the boards. It was actually the late delivery of the grants from the government. They certainly had their reasons for it, but just so you know, they're going to be moving forward with some of those staffing process. It's only fair that they give employees notice, and there's certainly rights for senior employees that exercise their rights. So that whole process will carry on, and that will begin actually tomorrow with one of the unions. So very important you hear that.
Thank you, Mr. Richard. I want to thank you for your work in this area and your guidance to our staff and to us. Director, thank you for your work. We appreciate it, and thank you, staff, for assisting us with these difficult deliberations. We now go forward in the next budget year with clarity and certainty and confidence that we are delivering a quality product for our elementary and secondary school students. So I just want to thank everybody for that. I want to apologize to Superintendent Ferguson, having decreased his status by referring to him as a trustee. And Vice Chair McPherson, I also beg your indulgence because I decreased your status by referring to you as an SO.
You missed the beat.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we are now moving into private session number 2. We will be coming out of that very briefly. I won't say we will be brief. We will not be brief in this section for private. But when we come out, we will be brief, and it will be a matter of formality. So, I need a motion that the Upper Canada District School Board move to Committee of the Whole June 12th. I guess this is your part.
Mr. Berry?
Mr. Berry?
No. I'm just moving.
This is going, right?
Agree.
Yeah, sure, we're still in.
In Committee of the Whole, June 12th, 2019 at 8:25. I need Mr. Berry, Trustee Berry, and
Trustee Swan.
Trustee Swan. All in favor? Can we just hands up, please? Thank you.
In favor.